your questions as quickly as possible, so I'd like to turn it over to Chair John, who's the head of our task force.
Okay, thank you. When we were notified in early December that the pipeline route had moved from Massachusetts into New Hampshire, including 4 miles of Amherst, the board did 2 things. One is we asked the Amherst Conservation Commission to do an environmental assessment of what that would mean for Amherst. And 2, we formed a pipeline task force. The pipeline task force has about 10 members on it, and we've been meeting irregularly. But among other things, we have started looking at alternative routes. We put together some comments on the route that has been proposed. We collected a set of questions that we're being asked by people, as well as questions that we'd like to have ourselves. We also cut the list down to 5 pre-selected questions and sent them to Kinder Morgan so they would know that we wanted them to come prepared to answer them. The rest we sent in on a written request through the NRPC. We're working on an overall economic impact of the pipeline on Amherst, pluses and minuses. We're trying to put together some educational documents and packages that present facts as opposed to advocates' positions. And we're also trying to put together some information around safety concerns. So we're working on that. I hope we'll be done in a couple of months or so, before the summer anyway. But again, as part of what we did, we sent some questions to Kinder Morgan and asked them to come prepared to answer that, and they are, after a brief presentation. The ACC finished its preliminary environmental assessment and finalized it last week. We'll put it up on the website tomorrow morning. For those of you who don't know, we have a pipeline information webpage on the Amherst Town website. It has a sign up for if you're interested in email blasts of information when we post new documents on the pipeline page. You can sign up for that. There's also a separate link to submit a question if you have a question you'd like answered. And that's pretty much it. It's a collection of useful information, not too biased, from whatever source we could find it. And as we collect more, we'll continue to put it up there. So I'd encourage you, if you're interested, to sign up for the email blasts. And again, if you have questions, there's a link to submit a question. Okay, thanks. I'll turn it over to Nate Jensen, our newer select.
So, thank you. I think as part of the hazing process, they asked me to do this for us tonight. So I'll be moderating tonight's discussion.
First day on the job.
Yeah, so thank you very much all. In the interest of efficiency, we're going to moderate this discussion this evening. Kinder Morgan is going to present whatever they have for us this evening. And then we will turn to the questions that were prepared by the pipeline task force that we have for Kinder Morgan. And then we'll open it up to comments and questions from the audience. We'd like to restrict comments and questions to residents of Amherst. And if you could step to the form a line at the, I believe we only have one microphone. If you could form a line at the microphone, and when you make your comment or question, if you could state your name and your address, and then confine yourself to 2 minutes, and then we'll try and move through as many people as we can. Otherwise, I think we're ready to have whatever you wish to present to us.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the chance to be here tonight in Amherst to talk about our proposed pipeline project. I'm Alan Four, Vice President with Kinder Morgan. Jim Hartman, our land manager, is also here, and we have a couple more folks that will be joining us in a bit. They were just finishing up at a similar meeting we had in Litchfield tonight. So what we hope to do tonight is to give you an overview of our project, our company, where we are in the process of developing this project, and then specifically how we see the next steps proceeding in relation to all stakeholders that are involved in projects of this kind, including the Board of Selectmen, individual landowners, interest groups, regulatory agencies, and many others. It's a big project. We know it's a big topic of interest, as shown by the turnout here tonight, and we're committed to having a rigorous public dialogue about what we're proposing to do. So, a little bit about our company and what we do. Our main purpose is transportation. So we transport product from one place to another. We don't own it, we don't sell it, we transport it. So this slide shows our natural gas pipeline system. That's our core business at Kinder Morgan. We have 70,000 miles of natural gas pipelines that transport product all across the United States. And you can see that represented in this slide here. Specific to the region, the purple line you see on this, blue line on this map, the Tennessee pipeline system. That system has been natural gas to New England for over 60 years. So what we're really proposing is an expansion of an existing a system that has been a major provider of natural gas to New England for a very long time. The best way to determine what exactly this is all about is to take a look at what we're doing already. And this system, again, has been delivering natural gas in a very similar way to what we're talking about now for a very long time. The Tennessee gas system is a major provider to New England, but also to the entire eastern United States, one of the major transportation systems. What is different now is where the gas is coming from. Historically, you can see the green regions in the southern part of the map. Natural gas is over the last 20 to 25 years is access to the Marcellus Shale region. That's shown in green and pink. Green and pink on my map, green and red on this map. But so the Marcellus and Utica shales, the most prolific natural gas supply, perhaps in the world, is now very close to New England. It's not as though it's just shown up, it's always been there, but the ability to access that natural gas is recent. So that natural gas is currently providing most of the natural gas supply to New England. So again, what we're talking about is not a new natural gas supply. You're going to get more of what you already get with an expansion of the system. So I want to emphasize that again. We're not talking about something new here in the sense of a new pipeline construction that we haven't seen before, an operating system that we haven't seen before, or a supply that we haven't seen before, and it's expansion of what already exists in New England. Part of that footprint that we have is existing customers. So again, we're in the transportation business, remember. Our revenue as a company comes from transportation charges, charging companies to transport on our system. We operate much like a tollway system. So you pay a toll to access our line. And these customers have been part of our customer base for a very long time. They currently receive natural gas from a transportation system that is part of our system, Tennessee Gas. And you can see at the top of the list is Liberty Utilities. And that's a big part of our expansion in New Hampshire is our working relationship and growing relationship with Liberty Utilities, the primary natural gas provider to New Hampshire. But many customers, part of the project, and that's important to understand because we don't proceed forward with proposals for new projects unless these customers want it. So they're telling us we need additional natural gas supply. We are responding to that with a proposal to address their needs. The towns and counties that are currently part of our system are listed here. And this is important because when companies talk about what they're going to do, the best way to see what they do is what they already do. What they're going to do, what they already do. For example, what do these towns have here as part of their current makeup of our system? And what does pipeline construction, once it's finished, look like? And we went out over the summer, fall, and took some pictures of existing pipeline right-of-way in New Hampshire. So this is part of our current system. And you can see these are not what every right-of-way is going to look like, but typical pipeline construction right-of-way, post-construction, is pictured here. And you can see that it is cleared in areas, so trees cannot grow back on top of the pipeline right-of-way, but you can see up to the roughly 40 or 50-foot easement is there. Other things can grow on top of the pipeline, and trees can grow right up adjacent to it. So whenever you see, I think you all know this, whenever you see the small above-ground markers, that means there is infrastructure there. And in this case, there's a natural gas pipeline. Again, we're talking about doing a very similar thing in a very similar construction method that you can see here. Also part of a system that the pipe itself is buried underground per regulation. So it's all buried, but we will have some above ground facilities. Compressor stations, meter stations, and valve stations. Compressor stations being the largest, and we currently have one planned for New Hampshire in the New Ipswich area. We'll also have meter stations and valve stations. You can see from a size perspective the differences in those. But again, these are typical current operating facilities that we have in New Hampshire. And we'll show a picture of a larger compressor station that we're looking at here in a bit, or a schematic of that. I mentioned the 50 miles of pipe that we currently have in New Hampshire, and the roughly $1.7 million we're paying to taxing bodies. And if Amherst is part of our expansion system, Amherst would be part of our additional tax base in the state. So when we develop projects, we look at what is the need for the project. Is there in fact a need? And we quantify that and base that upon our customers asking us to construct additional facilities and pipes to support their expansion plans, and that's the case for Liberty Utilities here. We don't build and hope someone will use it. The regulators wouldn't allow that, but we certainly would not be in business very long as a company if we built projects that no one is interested in using. So we base that on what customers come to us and say is a need. So Curtis is going to introduce a couple more members of our team here. Curtis Cole, who heads up our commercial and business development team, and Mark Hamrich, project engineering and overall project manager. But Curtis is going to talk a little bit about the commercial side so you can understand the dynamics that are going into developing a project, size and scope wise, and what is the need that is out there. We understand that this is a discussion much bigger than one pipeline. It's a regional discussion about what is the energy future for New England. It just so happens that right now, this particular project is in the middle of that discussion. Curtis?
Thank you, Alan. Sorry I was late there. My name is Curtis Cole. It's a pleasure to talk to you this evening. On this first chart here, basically what you're looking at is this light blue section. That represents how much gas New England is getting and projected to get from Marcellus. A lot of folks ask us about frack gas. Natural gas is fracked. That's the technology they use these days. The production zone in Marcellus Shale is the largest shale play in all of North America. So our customers came to us and they said, we want to get access to more gas coming from Marcellus. So in Marcellus, which is Pennsylvania, Ohio area, the amount of gas coming out of Marcellus that's moving to New England continues to grow. That gas also is in tremendous demand. It's going down to, pipelines are going down to Florida, pipelines are going down to Texas, it's going west, north into Canada. It's a huge basin. It's low price. Today, literally, the gas, I think, was like $1.60 versus in New England, it's in the 20s. There's no reason you should be paying prices that high when it's right next door, a couple states over. So what our customers came to us and they said, hey, get us access to the low-price gas. It's abundant. It's a projected 100-year life. And so that's what we're doing. We're responding to their requests. So along the way also, the amount of gas-fired generation, in other words, power plants that run on natural gas, has gone up from 15% up to 52% in just a matter of like 15 years. So in addition, right now in New England, you've retired a lot of the coal-fired facilities. You're reducing the amount of coal and fuel oil that you burn for natural gas, for power generation. And going forward, the ISO New England, which is the regional system operator, has projected you're going to lose about 25% of your power generation capabilities through 2020. Roughly 8,300 megawatts are at risk for retiring. So when you retire generation, even if it's inefficient, they said they need 5,900 megawatts to replace that. You got to replace it with something. Offshore wind, Canadian hydro, that means you got to build overhead transmission lines, wind and solar. I'll give you an example. Vermont Yankee nuclear facility that retired, to replace that with wind, it requires 55,000 acres of surface area of land to replace that one facility. And that's not even operating at 24/7, because when the wind's not blowing, you need gas-fired generation to fire up and keep the megawatts hitting the grid. So we like to look at our project as not just for local distribution companies. That's our anchor shippers that I'll talk about. They've signed up. This is about an energy project that's going to lower energy costs to the entire New Hampshire, New England region, both on gas for heating and for burning and generating electricity. So the ISO New England's president and CEO said basically increasing pressure on an already constrained natural gas infrastructure is our most pressing and urgent challenge. That's absolutely the case. What happens is when it gets cold, power generators, they don't operate on gas. They go off because there's only so much capacity into the region. We're at max capacity. So is our fellow pipeline companies. So what you're looking at is you're looking at pipeline companies trying to bring into the New England region two projects, major projects that are looking to, they're designed to alleviate those pricing basis differentials is what they call them. In other words, lower your gas costs, lower your electricity costs. When you have infrastructure in place, then the prices don't spike up. You have the highest energy prices in all of North America except for Hawaii. The reason that is there's no infrastructure. I was born outside of Chicago, and there's 7 interstate pipelines that serve that one city. Now, Chicago's huge, but it's 7 serving one city. You have only 5 pipelines serving 6 states. So it's a big change in infrastructure. Where you have infrastructure, if you look at any model out there, any pricing, you'll see they have much lower prices. That's a direct correlation to the energy. So one study that's out there said, it's by Competitive Energy Services, and they published it in December. They said if New England had capacity to import 2.7 BCF a day on existing pipelines, that's not including LNG imports from other countries, the current natural gas demand for LDCs is 4.5 BCF, and that does not include power generation. So then they took a look at it and said, what do we need to add for capacity into the region to serve power generation in the winter? And they said it's 2.4 BCF a day. And in terms of annual savings, that's almost $3 billion a year on the electric side alone. So that's a study, and it's been very consistent with a number of other studies. This just happens to be one that we've quoted. So electric generation also continues to increase in its amount that it's generating to the region. If you lose coal and fuel oil and nuclear, like Mount Tom coal fire station went down, the Braden Point schedule go down, Salem Harbor went down, it's being replaced with natural gas fired. Much cleaner burning. It's still a fossil fuel, so it's still a problem. It's not solar, it's not wind, but it's 10% of the particulate emissions that you would see on fuel oil. It's like 50% of the CO2 emissions. So your CO2, your NOx, and your SOx, all are reduced significantly with natural gas. It's a much cleaner burning fuel, and you have the highest fuel oil consumption of any states up here in New Hampshire and in this region. Other states, like I was mentioning from Chicago, we never would burn fuel oil. It's inconceivable. When you have gas, you run on gas, much cheaper. I think Liberty Utilities has estimated the energy savings to New Hampshire residents if you switch from fuel oil or propane is in the range of 50 to 70%. We are moving a ton of gas from the most prolific shale play in all of North America, and when we do that, move a lot of gas, the price goes way down. Those savings get passed on directly to consumers and customers of Liberty Utilities. So here's a slide on gas. It's just a couple moratoriums that were in the newspaper. Berkshire Gas imposes a moratorium. They basically said, we don't have the ability to move any more gas and serve new businesses and residents. So if you ever go online, you'll see a whole bunch of businesses say, we're running out of options here. We need natural gas. Same thing with Columbia Gas. So they're putting a moratorium, and they're basically saying, until we get a pipeline, Northeast Energy Direct, built, we can't accept new customers. Very significant. Also, Kinder Morgan, we have what we call our anchor shippers, and our three biggest in terms of capacity on the 500,000. There's National Grid, they're 186,963. Liberty Utilities is 115,000. That's a little over 20% of our contracted capacity. We refer to these folks as our anchor shippers. They're anchoring the project. They allow us to go out and get additional customers going down the road and sign them up later, but they're anchoring the project. Liberty Utilities has tremendous growth plans to serve the region.
If I may interrupt for a second. So you're on page 17 of a 53-slide deck. Can you move forward so we can get to folks' people's questions?
We're on the time frame.
Yeah, thank you.
I apologize. So switching to slide 52.
Excellent, thank you.
The rest will be
There. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Okay, moving right along. So from a scheduling perspective, where are we in the process? The slide shows generally the proposed schedule that we have put forward, and we're really right now in the pre-filing process, which means that we have filed initial documents with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. In fact, last week we filed additional about 2,100 pages of documents, all of which are publicly available, and we encourage you to look at this docket number here at the bottom. And by the way, we'll provide this presentation, if we haven't already, to the Board of Selectmen so that you can look at it at your, on your own time and send it to any of you if you would like it. But if you go to the FERC website, ferc.gov, and put in that docket number, that's our docket number for this project, you can get sent to you, emailed to you on a daily basis, all of the documents related to this project, free of charge. So another 2,100 were recently filed, which talk about all the details of this project, locations of facilities, resource reports of many kinds. So we encourage you to do that. This really is a transparent process, and you can access that information at the FERC database. The regulatory agencies involved with the project are extensive. It is a federally regulated project, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, but there are other federal agencies that are part of it. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, just to name a few, and also several state agencies. We're also part of the Site Evaluation Committee. So the state of New Hampshire will have great input on the overall approval of this project. And from a public perspective, we just finished a round of open houses in New Hampshire, and we're doing another set in a couple of weeks in New York and Pennsylvania. We'll have scoping meetings, not we, but the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission will host scoping meetings. Those are like public hearings that they will host and take testimony for the record. You can comment at any time at the FERC website on the project, and if you sign up for that docket number I showed you, you'll find out that a lot of people have a lot of comments, and they're sent to your email every day. So you'll understand what people are saying about the project as well as what we are filing. So In addition to that, the Site Evaluation Committee will have public hearings on the project, probably this summer, and we'll also be doing some additional open houses later this summer. The governor and the congressional delegation have both asked us to do that, and we're happy to do that. So we'll be having some of additional meetings over the summer as the project develops. We have maps and other items outside, and I encourage you to take that, but just as a high-level overview of our project from a macro perspective. The black lines are our current system. The system has been delivering gas for many years. The colored lines are our expanded system, Northeast Energy Direct project. Light blue, you can start, we're starting here in Pennsylvania. We talked about the shale area. That's where the shale is, Marcellus and Utica, primarily Marcellus. We're constructing new pipe in co-location meaning adjacent to or within existing utility corridors. This is the Constitution pipeline. It's the little red line actually you see, so we're very near that the entire route here. Then we're co-locating with our existing pipe, it's the black pipe here from Wright, coming into Massachusetts, and then we begin power line co-location, and that takes us into New Hampshire, finally ending in Dracut. So well over 90% of our route is co-located with some other type of existing infrastructure. Important from a regulatory perspective and important from an impacts perspective. We mentioned the FERC process. Again, I encourage you to visit their website for more detail, but this shows a little bit of detail about the public input aspect of the FERC process. Extensive and ongoing, and really just getting started. These are the towns that will be part of the expanded footprint of Northeast Energy Direct. So in some way, the town borders, jurisdictional boundaries will be impacted by some aspect of the pipeline expansion. It shows a little bit of a macro perspective of New Hampshire and the towns that we will be passing through. Mark?
Yeah, good evening. My name is Mark Hamrich, project manager. I'm going to talk about construction and some other processes here. Basically, the pipeline is built, the pipeline itself is built in spreads where we have spreads of say, 40 miles of pipeline, 40 to 50 miles built in a segment, and then we have 8 or 9 spreads planned to build this project all the way from Pennsylvania to Dracut with the laterals. This is the construction process that would show one spread. It's basically a wagon train type where the different crews, starting with clearing crews and grading crews and trenching crews and welding crews, they move along the pipeline in like a wagon train event. And as the crews move, the crews behind them follow up and complete the construction. So we start out with the clearing, go through the grading, the welding, and this is just a depiction of that. And then at the end, you've got your pipe backfilled, and you go back into your revegetation process of the pipeline. There are special techniques for certain wetlands and residential construction. I'll talk about one of those in a minute. As far as the right-of-way, we've got experienced professionals assigned to the right-of-way team. Jim manages the right-of-way team, and they're out there in the front end working with the public, working with the landowners, getting survey permissions. They work with us through easement negotiations, and then they follow up through the revegetation of the project. This here shows a pipeline right-of-way. In this instance, for the majority of the pipeline through New Hampshire, we're located next to a power line. There are a few places in Amherst where we do deviate, and our plan is to share as much of this easement in here and work on the right-of-way of the utility, Eversource, and use that as our side, and then have this other side outside and minimize what we do on the outside during the construction of the process. But that just shows you a cross-section of why we need certain, say for here, we may need 100 feet of right-of-way total to build and then go back to a 50-foot right-of-way because you have to have that equipment along the right-of-way. One of the special construction techniques we use is horizontal directional drilling, or HDDs. We do have 2 HDDs planned across the Sohegan River on both, when we deviate from the power lines. And this is a technique we would use where method of installing underneath a resource. This shows a river, but it could be a river, wetland, stream complex, roads, where you go in and you put in control your pilot hole drilling, go way deeper than your resource itself, and all your work activities on both sides of here. So you put your pilot hole in, then you come back and you ream it, and you make your hole deeper, larger, and then eventually you pull your carrier pipe through. And all your pipe is welded above on the right-of-way and then pulled in. So what this does is it protects the resource between these two ends of the directional drill. There's not a compressor station planned here. The closest one is in the New Ipswich area, and there's another one in Dracut, Massachusetts, but this is just a digital rendering of a station. This is a transformational project, so we had some photos earlier of some compressor stations that we're operating now, but this is designed as an 80 to 90,000 horsepower station. Just to put it in perspective, we're looking for about a 50 to 150 acre site. We would have 22 acres fenced in, 2 compressor buildings, auxiliary building. But again, there's nothing planned here, but there may be others from other towns, and I know there may be questions later related to compressor stations. As far as through the work, there's a lot of environmental considerations that we look at, a lot of it in pre-construction. You know, one of the reasons we're trying to do as much co-location as possible, as Alan mentioned, we have 90% or we have over 90% of this main line co-located with the power company, and we want to minimize environmental impacts by following these existing utilities. And we conduct surveys out there. We look for threatened and endangered species, wetland and water bodies, and cultural resources. And then during construction, we have, FERC will have independent environmental inspectors. We staff environmental inspectors to watch the process closely, work with our inspection team, work with our contractors to make sure that we comply with all the best management practices that are included in our permits as we go through the construction process. And then our restoration, I don't want to mislead. There's certain areas where we keep our permanent right-of-way where we don't allow large trees to grow back in that area, but in the temporary workspace and in some of the wetlands, they're able to revegetate. And then we continue to monitor this revegetation process for several years until we've got sign-off from all of our agencies, including the state and FERC. There's a lot of discussions on safety. Kinder Morgan is totally committed to safety. We're committed to build a safe pipeline. That starts with our design. Again, that starts with our routing of where we put our pipeline, the type of materials we use while we're building our pipeline, the coating systems we use, when we put it in, once it's in the ground. During the construction, all the welds that put in are 100% X-ray. The pipe is pressure tested with water to a higher pressure than it'll ever see during operation. Once it's in, we have a maintenance program. We have visual inspections, aerial patrol, typically monthly in the Northeast. This is a new area for us, but as far as New Hampshire, this pipeline, but the pipelines that we've got now, we've been doing it monthly, sometimes 2 weeks in higher populated areas for aerial patrols. We've got ground patrols also, and we have public awareness programs where we work with the communities and the emergency responders to make them aware of where our pipelines are located, where our valves are, what we should do in the extreme event of an emergency, so that we're connected with the community on those awareness programs. Just a quick look at the pipeline through Amherst. We follow in the power line corridor. We have a little deviation here because there's a substation here. We come in, as opposed to when we were doing the routing, we looked at several routes through here. We looked at, you know, should we route the pipeline through the school? Should we go around the school to the south? Should we go to the north? The solution we came up with at this phase is, we're looking at going this direction and then on, and that would be those are two of the directional drills we're planning right here. We would set up in here and right here. Again, a long way on the permitting process, but that's the current route through Amherst. And these are the alignment drawings that are all part of the FERC filing. I don't know if Alan referenced that, the docket number, but these drawings are all electronically available. And just basically, we've got a 4-point, there's just the drawings through there.
Just quickly on the routing, I'm sure there'll be questions about that tonight, and that's a big part of the overall discussion and permits of projects. So we are proposing a route. That will be part of a dialogue we're going to have with the Board of Selectmen, with the state of New Hampshire, with individual landowners, and what we are showing today may in fact be different when we actually file for our certificate application this fall. That's what this whole pre-filing process is meant to be, is adjusting the route, trying to make it better, addressing local concerns. And New Hampshire has a specific component on that with its siting process. So what you're seeing here is what we have proposed under part of our pre-filing resource reports. The route that we'll actually be pursuing in final form will be what we file this fall, and we think that will have, with a lot of input in it, it could be substantive, significant changes of length, or it could be a small, minor adjustment to deal with an individual landowner concern. All those discussions are ongoing. Pipeline projects do have significant benefits with jobs. We expect about 3,000 construction jobs to be part of this project. This will be a union project, so union locals, including the New Hampshire Building Trades and others, are part of this project, ensuring that local workers will have access to these jobs. We mentioned the tax revenue, $11 million to towns, another $5 to $6 million to schools. This is based upon the valuation of the asset, the physical asset. We mentioned specifically to Amherst as well. The big benefit long-term is the access to additional natural gas supply for reliability and expanded services. We are committed to outreach. We've had a lot of public meetings, open houses. I mentioned additional open houses this summer. We're also committed to being partners with your emergency responders and schools and others. And I quickly went through those last few slides. So with that, happy to respond to questions.
All right, so, excuse me. So John, as the chair of the Pipeline Task Force, would you like to talk about the questions that were submitted?
As I said before, the task force got about 2,000 questions that we either thought of ourselves or people were talking about it to us, so we added them. We cut the list down to 5 that we thought would be best answered in person, with the opportunity for follow-up questions to be given from either the board or the audience. And those are the 5 questions I assume we're about to go through.
Yeah. And just to be clear, this presentation that we just received, the response to the task force questions, and a letter that the Board of Selectmen have drafted to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission will all be on the town website tomorrow, so you can see this information there too.
And we have also provided written copies of our responses to hand out to the collective
That's
group.
correct, and those will be on the website tomorrow.
Okay. So what I think we'll do at this point is just address the question and then give the kind of a general summary of what we have put in writing, and then we can respond to follow-up questions as they come forward. So, Mark, you want to start out with the first couple of questions?
Yeah, you want to ask?
So the first question was about Kinder Morgan and Tennessee Gas in particular, the number of safety-related problems in recent years, percentage of safety-related problems for our domestic pipelines that are attributable to our transmission systems, and compare that with the other transportation systems.
Yeah, one of the, and again, this, we have the reference to our website on here, where we have this data and these charts, but one of the things we do is we track 35, we track ourselves against the industry peers in 35 measures related to OSHA safety records, environmental incidents, releases for products pipeline, because we also have products versus gas, and then natural gas incidents. And right now, we're trending where we're outperforming our peers 30 out of 35 of those measures. So again, that's just a little factoid that's on the page. We also track a rolling 3-year average of incidents, and an incident can be something as severe as a rupture. It could just be a release of gas through a normal venting of the gas and things. So right now, we're outperforming our peers. It's based on 1,000 miles of pipeline that we operate. We're at a .25. The industry average is a .38. So we're better than industry average on those statistics. And then for any kind of major where we have a gas release, we're on a .03, and the peers on a .07. So that means, compared to average, if you just put it, it doesn't relate the number of incidents, but it just puts it on from a peer level of our people that are operators of the natural gas, and it's based on about 50,000 miles of our pipelines. We're outperforming our peers on that. So there was a link on there where this chart wasn't in your distribution, but this is what you can see on our webpage as far as
Is that
safety
an
performance.
overall safety performance for all pipelines transporting all products, or is that restricted to gas pipeline, transmission pipelines?
It's transmission pipelines, but we've got, it's transmission pipelines for natural gas.
Okay.
And one of the statistics about the 30 to 35 measures also includes our CO2 group and our petroleum products also. Our liquids products. And in the Northeast, one of the questions was, how's our record in the Northeast? And what we're considering the Northeast in this case is all the 5 states that we're looking at this project, or the 6 states: New York, Mass, New Hampshire, Connecticut. In the last 5 years, we've only had one incident, and that was a safety device that vented. And again, that becomes a reportable incident on the record, but there's no harm or incident to the public. So we've had a very good safety record in the Northeast in this area. I think the other question, they were saying, is it better or worse than industry average? We're trending better than industry average. Our goal is to be as much better than industry average, and the question is why. We put a lot of effort in our safety programs, again, starting with how we construct our pipelines, what our standards are for constructing, and then once we're construction, how we operate and maintain those pipelines. We have a very strict and robust integrity management program, and work through the foundations and try to be an industry leader in as far as how we maintain our pipelines and what our maintenance and integrity management programs are. Let's see, the other one was,
So number 2 is, so what is the process by which Kinder Morgan considers and evaluates alternate routes for its proposed pipeline?
yeah, we look at a lot of different things. One of the things we look at is to make sure that we're finding locations where we can accommodate the pipeline. And one of the things we had looked at was, can we look at co-location, and then where can we have the least impact to both the public and the environment? So, for example, in Amherst, we looked at several alternatives before we put the line where it's at now, and we're in the process of looking at other possible alternatives. We got several suggestions after the open house meetings that we're evaluating some of the alternatives, because there are a couple areas through the Amherst area that we could possibly, look at other alternatives. We'd like to stay close to the power line easement. We feel in most cases that's the least impact. But there's several areas where we'll look at, what's a site-specific, concern of what's there, who we're going to impact, how many landowners we're going to impact, what resources we're going to impact. So when we looked at our global alternatives, we tried to look at the best route to get that pipeline from Pennsylvania to market. And we looked at several alternatives along that as global alternatives and locked in on where we're at now. We're still in part of our resource reports is Resource Report 10, but we try to avoid, any highly sensitive areas, areas that we can't adequately and safely construct through. So there's a lot of effort goes into where our routing goes and what kind of alternatives we look at.
You want to go into the specifics of each of those if you want? Okay. So in regards to cul-de-sac roads, for example, Simeon Wilson, Patricia Lane, if there was ever a catastrophic accident, how are residents supposed to evacuate the area if the pipeline crosses the one and only exit? People could potentially be trapped without any egress. Also, how will access to people's homes be maintained during construction?
Yeah, during construction, I'll start with that. During construction, there will be access maintained to these roads. If these roads are, if they're open cut, there will be plates or there will temporary drives if we're able to permit open cut. If not, the roads would be bored. If they're bored, that's a trenchless technology where we go underneath the roads and the people would be, of course, we don't want to shut anybody off from their home during the construction process, whether they live on a cul-de-sac or any other kind of, whether it's near their driveways or whatever. So during construction, there's methods to maintain the access. Now, when you talk about a pipeline failure or a catastrophic event where someone would have to evacuate, one of the things, again, it's a very rare event, but in these cases, near these roads, one thing that is done near the roads, the pipe wall thickness is a little heavier. There's concrete, typically concrete coated put on the pipe at these road crossings to protect it from any kind of failure at that location, to prevent any kind of, reduce the risk of any kind of damage in that specific area there. So we're not looking at routing the pipe away from there, but we're looking at putting safety precautions to make sure that the ingress would be able to, they would be a rare event if they weren't able to get out of that location. But we haven't looked at, alternates around those cul-de-sacs.
Okay. Moving on to question 4. Where is Kinder Morgan in its co-location conversation with Eversource, formerly PSNH? We understand that co-location means parallel to existing right-of-ways and not contained within existing right-of-ways. According to Kinder Morgan documents, 0 feet of existing right-of-way will be used in the final path of the pipeline. Will more homeowners, other than the 66 previously identified in Amherst, be affected with the additional land needed for the project?
Okay, the 66 is what's identified in a 400-foot survey corridor we have identified. So there's a possibility that there may be some of those, depending on how the line shifts when we go survey. If we make any changes, there's always a possibility that other landowners may be impacted, but then out of those 66, not all 66 could be impacted either. So as we move forward, there is a possibility that there may be other landowners. If there's a shift for some reason in the design of the pipeline, as Alan was talking about, there's some flexibility in here, and if we have to move, there may be other landowners impacted. There may be some landowners in this survey corridor that don't fall within the workspace once we finalize the co-location agreements with Eversource. We're still early on in discussions with them, but we've got our teams in place to discuss the co-location, and it's not, right now, the way our project's laid out, we will have our pipeline 5 feet outside the utility corridor easement, and we will overlap easements. We will overlap 20 feet permanent easement and with the power line corridor, but that'll require an additional 30 feet outside the corridor. So that's kind of our base premise for permanent right-of-way. 50 feet, 20 will be co-located with the power company. If we can get the agreements and there's no encumbrance there, and then 30 feet outside. And then as we looked at the charts, the workspace, there's a couple of designs we're looking at. Where we can, we want to use our temporary workspace also inside the power easement. If we have enough space and we can work there and not encroach on the power company's operation during construction, we would like to utilize that space. That would minimize any temporary workspace outside. But there are some areas we may have to have additional temporary workspace outside the power line easement. So we could have, besides the 30 feet outside, an additional 30 feet or 40 feet outside that power line that would work. So it could range anywhere from 30 feet outside the power line to, say, 80 feet for standard construction. And there are some areas at staging areas or near roads where we may need more outside than the 100 feet, and we'll pick those spots for that, have the least impact to the environment or whatever. They won't be in subdivisions and areas
Right.
like that where there's extra workspace.
But you won't be able to finalize that until you finalize the route you're planning to drill or cut.
Kind of goes hand in hand. We'll be working, the discussions with the power company and their shared easement, and the discussions with the property owners and their discussion, we're going to have to reach a balance of where we can properly, and then with the environmental surveys, where we can properly place that pipeline.
Okay, let's move on to question 5. How does Kinder Morgan engage with public safety organizations, the police, fire, and EMS in the towns it pipeline crosses? What types of support, that is financial, training, equipment, regular and emergency communications, et cetera, does Kinder Morgan provide to public safety providers? And what municipal and public training does Kinder Morgan conduct to help educate municipal maintenance crews that may have the responsibility of working near the pipeline?
Yeah, we have what we call our damage prevention group, and we have on the current operations, and we foresee it here on the new pipelines, is we've had annual trainings and training sessions with the emergency responders. But what we'll do first is we'll have an operations emergency operating plan, and we'll come and work with the communities on that and make sure that Amherst understands, okay, and this will start during construction. I mean, this would be right up front, communication during construction, because during construction, you've got equipment, you've got personnel, you have a possibility of we work with all the local responders just because we have people out here constructing where the hospitals are, how we would act in emergency if someone was out on the right-of-way and broke their leg, or how they had to get emergency responders. And so we're going to start working with the town early on in the process. Jim's team's going to start working on it now. We have surveyors here. So we'll start the communication with the towns early during the process, but prior to that pipeline ever being commissioned for operation, we would work with the responders as far as, okay, where's the pipeline located? How's the pipeline marked? Where's the valve stations on the pipeline? There may not be valve stations in Amherst. There may be, but we would know where they were in the neighboring towns where these valve stations were. So you would know exactly where the footprint of that pipeline is through the town, what the operating system is on our pipelines. Do we have valves in an emergency that shut automatically? Do they? And so we would work with you and work with your responders so you understood the gas and we understood your needs. And what we're looking for in emergencies is the company, Tennessee Gas, will handle the gas and whatnot. The emergency responders would have to, work with us so they understood what the command center was for Tennessee, and you work with us. So it's an annual training, it's a training up front, and it's a communication with our operations folks, just like any other business you may have in the community, so we can have the public responders understand what our system is and what's going to happen in an emergency and how we would react to an emergency. Now, as far as...
Go ahead, you had a question.
Oh, yeah, and then the one call, the 811 is a big thing as far as protecting the integrity of the pipeline.
I'm sorry, the 811?
Yeah, the one call.
Dig safe.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I just had one question that I provided you earlier, but if the town of Amherst or an individual has concerns with the proposed route due to safety or environmental concerns, what specific steps should be taken to make sure that these concerns are addressed?
So the best way to do that is to work with us. Now, if it's an individual landowner concern, Jim, you have somebody here? Is Mike here? or- Okay, Mike Lennon, are you out there somewhere? Right there. Mike Lennon and another agent there with him. Those are the folks that are assigned to specifically work with individual landowners on individual concerns related to property. They can also address other concerns that may come up, that others may have that are residents in the area. So what we would encourage you to do is contact us, and what we'll do too, in addition to, for the Board of Selectmen too, is establish a point of contact for whatever inquiry you might get, so we can make sure that that's addressed to the appropriate person from our team that can give you the best answer. If it's an environmental question, we've got an environmental team, and they also have contractors and consultants that are working on the project. So we want to do what's most efficient for you to deal with that. But usually the folks that are right out in the communities working with individual landowners are the best point of contact and can address most of the local concerns.
Okay, is
And
there-
I'll add too, one other question about before, what Mark was talking about regarding the emergency response too. So that's what we do. We do all of the things that Mark mentioned, but we also know that this project has an increased heightened interest in the community and through New Hampshire, and we want to look at other ways we can help in the community. You saw some pictures up there of things we've done in other areas with equipment and things like that, so we'd be happy to have a discussion with you about that as well.
Are there other questions from the selectmen? Okay. I think we should open it up to questions from the audience. If you would make your way to the microphone, please. Okay, Park? Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Joseph McCool. I'm a resident of Amherst, and I serve on the Pipeline Task Force here in town. Had one question initially here. In the letter that impacted townspeople received in mid-December, it stated in one of the very first paragraphs of this letter that this was a, quote, federal undertaking, end quote. Yet Alan went on to talk about the customers and the needs of this pipeline because you are, in fact, a for-profit company. Why were the words federal undertaking used in your very first communication with impacted landowners?
I'll have Jim talk specifically to the landowner letter, but let's talk about how natural gas, interstate natural gas pipelines are governed.
No, I'm asking why a publicly traded company told people in this room and the Amherst residents of Amherst that this was a federal undertaking.
Because it is a federally regulated process.
That's different from a federally initiated process.
Okay?
Okay? So, I'm afraid you lost credibility on your very first correspondence with us. But two other things. You talk about 66 landowners. Do you have any idea of how many adults and children are represented in those 66 properties or homes?
Joseph, and good evening, folks. My name's Jim Hartman, and we haven't been able to meet. We've tried to meet with every landowner and get to know the family and get to know their concerns, and that's through the survey request process. So to answer your question specifically, we know that there's 66 properties that are impacted, and through the deed work, we could determine whether it may be a husband and wife or a company or an individual, but I can't say for certain every single person that is occupying the property.
So it's possible that there are as many people who would actually be impacted by the encroachment of the pipeline as there are in this room, or perhaps even more. So it's not 66.
You're right,
It could
it's
be
not,
several
it's not
hundred-
66.
It
You're
could be
right,
hundreds of people.
you're right.
Okay, and just the last question I would have is, you mentioned $510,000 in tax revenue for the town. Have you advised the town in terms of the cost of upgrading firefighting and disaster response training, facilities, and equipment that would be required to respond in the event of what you would call an anomaly?
So the tax revenue that we are estimating is based upon the valuation of the asset itself, so the pipe. But I also referenced, as you heard me say just a couple of minutes ago, we want to work with the town and work with them on any additional, in addition to the training that we will do, on any equipment or other items that we can work with the town on to provide in addition to that. So we're certainly open to that.
Good evening. My name is Martin Rowley. I live on 8 Old Mount Vernon Road. My question...
I'm sorry, could you speak louder, sir?
Sure. Is that good enough? All right. My question revolves around how New Hampshire got to be the alternate route for this pipeline. Why was it changed from northern Massachusetts to its present location?
So as part of the process for evaluating routes, and we started the process probably about a year and a half ago, and before that, really, from an exploratory standpoint, is to take a look at a route that gets to the servicing of customers, or potential customers, and also takes into account a variety of factors that we believe could be permittable, help a project to be permittable. So that is avoidance of certain environmental areas, reducing the number of landowners, co-location is one of those. There are a variety of factors you look at from a very large perspective on siting of pipeline infrastructure. And we do this all across New England and throughout the United States. Then you take a closer look and you start having a public dialogue about that. And when we did that, working with the resource agencies primarily in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, what else can we do to touch upon those major points, co-location, impacts of resources, numbers of landowners, and others, to help refine and make the route better? And we are impacting Massachusetts differently, but we're still impacting Massachusetts significantly. In fact, probably 2 to 3 times the number of towns in Massachusetts than in New Hampshire still with this route adjustment. So it's not moving the line out of Massachusetts and into New Hampshire. What the New Hampshire piece, the importance...
Well, excuse me, it certainly is moving it out. I
Well,
mean, I've seen your map, sir.
If let me finish. Again, I'll say what I just said. There's still double or more the number of towns in Massachusetts that are part of the project than New Hampshire. The reason that we looked at this
Folks,
alternative...
let him finish, please.
Two main reasons, which we think are beneficial to New Hampshire as well. The co-location piece, co-locating with existing infrastructure, and we could do that in Massachusetts as well, and we are. We are on the route that we're looking at from the right area here. This is co-located with power line as well. So we did that adjustment in New York and Massachusetts as well. But the New Hampshire piece, and at the end of the day, the regulators will decide where we can site this. But in addition to co-location is the access to additional natural gas, not only to areas in New Hampshire that currently have gas service, but west of Milford in areas that do not have natural gas service. That is a real possibility because Liberty Utilities has talked publicly about their interest in expanding their footprint to additional natural gas customers, and not hypothetically real. They want to do this. So the only way they can do that in areas particularly that aren't serviced by a natural gas transportation system, transmission system, is to have that system, be able to access that and increase their distribution system for New Hampshire. So the co-location piece, the access to natural gas piece, the two major reasons.
All right, thank you. My final question is, the capacity of this pipeline is far in excess, is it not true, of what is required to even generate power for New Hampshire and for New England?
That's a very good question. The estimates that I was talking about earlier today, in order to have enough gas for all the power generation in the winter, it's 2.4 BCF. That's more than even a
Could
30
you explain what BCF is, please?
billion cubic feet per day. And so all of New England for the LDCs is currently at 4.5 BCF. So adding on another 2.4, that covers all the LDCs and the power generation, give you an idea. So our project at a 36-inch pipeline can flow 2.2 BCF a day. We will put in to match our market demand, or what our customers are requiring. We will make that decision sometime over the course of the summer, and it'll be in our FERC filing in the fall. It very well could be a 30-inch pipeline. It'll be sized to our market. So we've identified the largest amount of gas that we would be proposing, and that's in our FERC filing. It's based on a 36-inch, 2.2 BCF a day. It could be a 30-inch. So we see the need for power generation, future growth, but the market will dictate the size of the project.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Joan Porro. I live at 9 Windsor Drive in Amherst, and I have some basic questions. One is, if the pipeline is as safe as you say it is, why do you have it circumnavigate north of the Souhegan High School?
When we looked at the route through here, one of the things, when we were looking at the route siting elsewhere, one of our premises, we had other high schools that we were going near. And we were getting some pushback from the schools. We did not reach out to the school. We did not reach out to the community. We looked at it. We don't think it has anything to do with how safe it is, but it's a say a perception or a siting concern when you're close to a facility like this. So we said, you know, even though the power lines go right through here, we've got safe pipelines. We've got pipelines right up against, over on our Concord lateral in Londonderry, where we operate 2 pipelines right next to the school safely. But given the opportunity during the initial siting, we looked at it and we said, you know, let's look at a different alternative to see if we can deviate from the school. And so we chose the northern route, and we chose directional drills, which was probably, you know, more costly, but it was a decision we made that we felt through the siting process was a better option than trying to route through the school, realizing it was safe. Either it wasn't as much a safety concern as it was a siting and perception concern. Now, we're still in discussions. Those are two difficult directional drills. They're under other resources. You know, and alternatives we didn't look at, maybe back through the school area. So that was the decision process we went through. Just like a couple other areas where we deviated from the power line, we felt those were better alternatives than staying with it.
So I'm not a property owner on Simeon Wilson, but you figured it was easier to battle the property owners on Simeon Wilson than to battle all the parents of the Souhegan High School.
Not necessarily.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
So I'm Tariq Nazir, and I live in Simeon Wilson as well. So beyond just the safety issues, I got another question around economics, right? So for most of us sitting here in the room, right, whether we are part of the 66 who are directly impacted or the others who are in the periphery, a majority of our savings, personal savings, are invested in our homes. And have you done any studies that really look at the impact of real estate prices going forward once you end up having a power, not a power line, but in this case a natural gas pipeline thrown in there?
The short answer is yes. We personally have not, the industry has, so they're third party. And we've actually got those studies referenced on our website. So they are available. And, you know, easement and construction affects properties different ways. It all depends on the individual property. Whether it's a house lot, well, and I'm serious, because the impact is different. And those studies actually said that there was no impact on value. And I can only say what the study deducted. But, and
Folks,
as
please hold it down.
started to say, it impacts properties differently. For instance, let's say you had a 50-acre parcel and you wanted to subdivide it. And right now, we had our pipeline routed so that it went down the middle of it. Now, one of the goals that we would have through this process would be to talk to you through the survey process and look at possibly your subdivision map. Because right now, we could be going right through the middle of house lots and impact those lots before they were constructed. But through that interactive process, we might be able to adjust the pipeline so that it went more along the property line. So then you can recognize that the potential damage to the property, in that case, would be much less, because we wouldn't then be impacting or have a severance damage on the property. Likewise, let's say that we're going through a property that has a special feature. Maybe it's a rock garden or stream or something that we could potentially avoid that added some value to it. And again, through that interactive process, in this part of the project, we'd have the ability, hopefully, to possibly shift and minimize that impact. One of the processes that we go through the pipeline project is to sit down and work with each individual landowner through the acquisition process. And there's offers that are made, it's based on real estate values for the exact impact on the property, negotiations that occur for your particular property and what damage you have on your property. So it's a very interactive process. I hope that helped.
So in fairness to the last questioner, most of the links to the impact on property values on the Kinder Morgan website reference properties where the pipeline went in first and residential development occurred second. There are some studies available. There are some studies available about, particularly in Pennsylvania, where residential development happened first and pipelines are going in now. So one of the things the task force is trying to do is get our arms around that query question. What happens when a pipeline comes into a developed area?
Yes, sir.
My name is David Beach. I reside on Simeon Wilson Road here in Amherst. I've got a couple questions related to compressor stations. Looking at your map, I see one compressor station in New Hampshire. Could you highlight that? Okay, and I notice on the same map in the Wright, New York area, there are two compressor stations that are relatively close together. And my question is this. My understanding is the pipeline is designed to carry 2.2 billion cubic feet per day at maximum capacity. But my belief is that the compressor stations you have identified won't do that. So can you promise the residents of Amherst that we won't get a compressor station?
The compressor stations that are designed to carry the 2.2 billion per day with the 30-inch here and the 36-inch here. Under this current project, there will be no compressor station in Amherst.
I'm not asking about this current project. I'm asking about this pipeline. I was informed by FERC at the open house that was held in Milford that at one point a project, after having received FERC authorization to proceed, before the first gas passed through the compressor station, there was a subsequent project to upgrade that compressor station. Will you make the promise that that won't happen on this pipeline?
I cannot promise there won't be a compressor station here, but there is no compressor station designed now, and if there's any other projects in the future, they would have to go through a similar siting process.
Yes, sir.
My name is Donovan McCarthy. I live on Boston Post Road. I'm just going to make a few observations, and I will finish with a question. First, thanks for the forum and the time, and also thank you for demonstrating your disregard for resources by the quality of the paper and the ink that you've wasted with this
Let's
scribble.
let's keep it
Sure.
civil.
Oh, okay.
All right,
The
thank
first
you.
thing is, why do we need a pipeline? Tennessee Gas Pipeline Company is a Kinder Morgan company, has been transporting natural gas to the northeast United States to supply the local distribution companies since the 1950s. That's the reason we need the pipeline? Good example of wasting paper and ink. We don't need to know that. Your fact sheet, it puts you in the ranks of Walmart, Comcast, companies to me that sacrifice quality for the sake of profits. To go on more, you talk about, what is Kinder Morgan?
Okay, we understand your point. Let's come to the question.
What is Kinder Morgan's safety record? Does not give an answer. This gentleman up here alluded to the safety record in New England being so good. As you also mentioned, the infrastructure is minimal. So I think it'd be fair for you to give us one or maybe two of the worst case scenarios that you've experienced as a company in all of the country. Like when you get any sort of waiver or medication, they tell you what could happen. Why don't you tell us what could happen, please, and thank you.
We've had, in the last 5 years on Tennessee, we've had 14 incidents that resulted in property damage or injury. There was an incident, a series of incidents in 2011, and this is all public documentation, in Ohio, where we have, I think we have 4 pipelines running through southeastern Ohio, and there was some weld failures on the pipe. These are pipes that were built in the 60s and 50s, and there were some weld failures on the pipe. And in 2 of the incidents, one of the incidents, there was no, when the pipe failed, there was no ignition or fire. In 2 of them there was, and in 2 of them there was houses, 2 houses that caught on fire near the pipeline. No injuries, people were able to escape. The company reacted through the emergency response. The valves closed like they were. Gas control sensed it. Our folks, our operations people worked with the emergency responders, isolated the area. And so all the procedures that were in place, the incident command centers in Houston, the ones in Ohio with the local responders, everything went as planned. We were able to isolate it, secure the area, and move on. And what we found from that, a couple of things. One was that was a landslide area where that earth in Ohio is very unstable, and it had been moving, and it had put undue stresses on that pipeline. So over the years, they'd put undue stresses on that pipeline, and it caused some pipe failures, alluded to some possible maybe weld defects from before. But since then, the company's gone and implemented an integrity management program where we've gone in and replaced all the welds, all the bends, all the pipe that may have been faulty. We've also got sensors set up along the pipeline to monitor any movement of the pipe. So things do happen rarely, but in that case, no one was hurt. There was some property damage, there was some gas loss, but subsequent to that, we found some things about the system that we can learn in our designs and how we construct and where we construct, and we're monitoring that system now under the guidance of PHMSA. And that's all public knowledge. So that's something that's close to this region as far as Ohio, and it's something that's recent and something on our current system.
Okay, before you begin, let's try and keep things civil in this conversation, so, go ahead. Thank you.
I'm Tiani Coleman. I also live on Simeon Wilson. I'm not one of the 66 impacted landowners, yet I feel very impacted. We moved here not too long ago, and so we know exactly why we chose the place we chose and what was important to us. And with the impact of the pipeline, the way it would change the very character of our community and the river that's behind us and all of these things, there is no way that we would pay the price that we had just paid for our home. So my question is, I'm someone who's going to be impacted, yet you're not going to be dealing with me whatsoever. So I'm not going to be able to get any kind of compensation, but the people whose homes, they're going right through their very property, if there's really no impact, as you state on your questions here, why don't you buy up the property at full market value and resell it?
I did talk a little bit about the negotiation process, and that is a long process that is fair and equitable, and we hope that it is. Our goal is to work out an amicable agreement with every single landowner that we impact, and we have a very good success rate at that, probably greater than 90 to 95%. So the concessions that are made, the agreements that are reached are amicable because of our success rate. The compensation that is paid, as I said, is 100% of fee. So in essence, for the area of land impacted, we are paying 100% full fair market value for an easement. So we are paying that amount for the land that we're impacting. And at the end of the day, it's still your property. You can still enjoy it. You still have some of the uses on it. And we as well share the right to use the pipeline, which is what we're trying to acquire.
Walter Colby, 12 Nichols Road. I'm not directly impacted, but as a longtime resident of this town, I basically want to express my concerns. First one, basically, just in relation to impact, I basically found, related on the town of Groton, Mass., the law offices of Peter Flynn basically talk about the impact to property values. So I guess one question I have is, based on that slide north, how much was that pushback on the property values in support of the governor, Deval Patrick, in terms of your decision to move northward?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Basically,
Governor Patrick.
Just the desire to move northward with that line. I mean, basically, if you look at the southern tier from Winchester all the way to Dracut, you basically hit every town on the southern line, the most populated parts of New Hampshire, with the exception of Nashua and Hollis. Why the move north?
Well, not to be repetitive, but I mentioned earlier the reasons you look at for identifying alternatives, identifying an original route, and you have to look at a design that is, at the end of the day, going to be permittable and commercially viable. Commercially viable means there's customers that are going to support a project routed that way, and that the agencies are going to be able to approve it. There was a question before about routing here near the high school. You know, we have proposed something. At the end of the day, it's not us who determines what this routing will be. We have to propose and advocate and defend our proposed route, but the regulators could come back and have some ideas of their own. And I expect that the Board of Selectmen will. I expect many of you. I'm going to tell you something. In our previous route, we made a significant adjustment, not just in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, but also in New York, based upon input that we received. And this is additional input that we're going to receive. We still have 115 miles of pipe in Massachusetts as part of this project. 115. There's 70, a little over 70 in New Hampshire. So both states have impacts on the project. But we fully expect to have additional modifications. The state of New Hampshire hasn't even yet taken a close look at this. They will through their site evaluation process. And FERC is going to do that as well through their scoping process. So I would encourage those who have alternatives in mind or discussions that they want to have take to the next step, to talk to us, to talk to the board, to talk to those regulators, because at the end of the day, they're going to make the decision.
Just one follow-up, and I think Nate can relate to this one. As a fellow firefighter, what is the burn rate on those big explosions that I've saw on YouTube all over the place? How long do they burn for?
if there is an ignition, there's a possibility they'll burn until all the gas that's in when the valve's shut, depending on the valve spacing, those valves shut, and then that gas is just going to burn. There's no way to extinguish it on that.
So, but, couple of notes. Basically, as a firefighter, you actually go into homes with methane detectors. The reason why? Because if there's basically a large dosage of gas, you can actually kill people because it's not breathable, right? Is that a fair statement? So moving on.
In a confined area.
Basically, it's good that it burns. It's safer to burn off.
It'll still vent up. The gas will still.
Because
unlike
it's a high pressure line.
Yeah, but not because it's high pressure, because it's lighter than air. It's gonna go up, and if it's not confined, it's gonna go up anyways.
So, just one point, I don't think you answered the question of, based on our setup, where would those shutoff valves be? And how long would we expect, if we had a catastrophic failure, how long would it burn for?
I don't have the calculation on the burn, but the valves could be spaced depending on where they're located. We don't have them designed yet. We will have them designed in the next few months for our next filing. But depending on the location and the population density, they could be as close as 8 miles apart or as far apart as 20 miles.
So how long does 8 miles burn for versus 20 miles?
Okay, yeah, it's enough, Walter. Thank you. We'll move on to the next one. Yep. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Peter Rowe. I live in the north end of town, off of Tanglewood. We're not significantly impacted by this, but I have a daughter in this high school, which causes me to have some interest in this. My employment is as a physician, and as such, I was the director of emergency services for Delaware County, New York, which is roughly where the blue line crosses New York and meets the other lines up in that little corner there. And on January 25th of 2004 in Davenport, they blew an 8-inch propane pipeline. So to give you sort of an idea of what that would do, that instantly destroyed a house. The family, fortunately, was not in the house. It took 3 days to find the dog. That burned for about 3 or 4 days. So that may answer the question that was asked before. We're talking about putting in a 36-inch pipeline. In terms of cross-sectional area, that's 25 times that 8-inch pipeline. I'm not convinced that with a catastrophic failure, we are anywhere near far enough away from this school with a 25-inch pipeline. How do you know you're not going to detonate my daughter? That's my question.
As I said earlier, the processes we go through to build these pipelines and the materials we use and the quality assurance that we use to install them and to maintain them, we do everything we can to reduce the risk of any remote catastrophic event on the pipeline.
I realize we're talking about a reduction in risk, but we're never going to get it to zero. I know that. That's just a fact of life. There's risk. There's always risk. The question is this your lowest risk route? Because I'm not buying that this is your lowest risk route.
We're significant distance from the high school, but we're not going to get into that, lowest risk route.
Okay.
Well, yeah, imagine 25 houses, okay, with 25 times the size. I think that's the blast zone we're looking at.
What we're doing
is... Are there other locations that would be less impactful on something like a school? I mean, this is what I'm worried about living in the north end, where it's not going to blow up my house.
The way the pipeline, the way the standards are, the way the integrity management programs work, the way the maintenance program works, it's all accounted for as far as population density, where you put in heavier wall pipe, where you pig your line, where you run your pigs, your intelligent tools through the line to detect any kind of defects and repair them. All of those programs are in place to ensure that pipelines in what they call high-consequence areas, such as schools within a certain distance of the pipe, other population centers, other gathering places, that the pipelines programs are the most scrutinized and designed pipelines that can be put in. Can you reduce a risk to 0, I don't know if I can answer that, but it's a very rare event, and we're doing everything we can and believe this is a safe system that we're going to install, and we've got a proven track record on even pipelines that weren't built to the modern technology, and they're still, by proper maintenance and operation, are very safe pipelines.
Okay,
I hope you're right.
Hi, Nancy Palmer, Pleasant Lane in Amherst. From your opening statements, you said that you're in the business of transporting gas. So my understanding from your presentation and the research I've been doing over the last few months is your goal is to transport it from the shales up to your destination of being Dracut, Mass. My first question also is it true that now they're reversing gas that's coming, used to come from Canada and or Nova Scotia down to Dracut? Now they're now reversing that to go to Dracut up to Nova Scotia and or Canada to be transported overseas into the global market, and what are your intentions for global profit? That's my first question. How much of this is going to actually be exported off of the continental U.S. and not come to our backyards? And the second question is, if the destination is from Pennsylvania to Dracut, Mass., why in the world would we in New Hampshire want to have you use our land and our homes and our safety and our environment to do your dirty work when the goal is to keep it in Massachusetts? I don't understand that.
Thank you, appreciate your question. So I'll deal with the first question. The question is, she's referring to this pipeline right here. It's called Maritimes and Northeast Pipeline. The blue is jointly owned between Portland Natural Gas Transmission System and Spectra. They jointly own that blue line. And then once it gets up to where Portland Natural Gas intersects, shown here kind of like a purple pinkish, from this point on up into Atlantic Canada, it's owned entirely by Spectra. That has nothing to do with us, that's their pipeline. Currently, it's a very good question, Portland Natural Gas transports Canadian natural gas all the way across Canada, or I should say TransCanada Pipeline transports Canadian natural gas all the way across Canada, and it comes down Portland Natural Gas Transmission System, back down the joint facilities, and interconnects with us at Dracut. That's where we would get gas, and it'd help us provide more gas in this part of our service territory. Likewise, up in Atlantic Canada, way up here, there's Canadian offshore production. It's called Deep Panuck and Sable Island. There's all kinds of data on this. They're dwindling rapidly. The amount of Canadian gas coming into the United States is dropping significantly. You actually have a net outflow right now. The Canadians are buying Marcellus gas. They're moving it into Canada. Same thing here. The reason that Spectra is considering, and they've actually filed to reverse this and make it bidirectional, is because there's a lot of demand for gas in Atlantic Canada for Marcellus gas, because it's about 20% of the cost of what they're selling it for up in Atlantic Canada. So what has happened is the Canadian producers said, I cannot compete with Marcellus, I'm not going to put money into Canadian production. So whereas this pipeline can flow almost a BCF a day, north to south, you're down around 200-300 a day because you're running out of gas. So that's the first question. They have filed to make it bidirectional. They intend to take gas up their system all the way up into Atlantic Canada. They have that ability to do that. The reason that we like to get to Dracut is we replenish our system here. We actually conserve and replace the Canadian gas that is normally coming down. We go right back down Spectra system, hub line, and conserve Algonquin gas transmission system as well. In terms of our customers, we're serving Berkshire Gas, Liberty Utilities, Columbia Gas. This is more than just getting to Drake-It, but once we get to Drake-It, one of the big benefits we have is you basically create a highway all the way around you. You have two sources of gas. If Liberty Utilities, God forbid if we ever had an incident down here, we couldn't feed Concrete Lateral. Now with another pipeline serving Liberty Utilities service territory, that increases the reliability of their system significantly, having two sources of gas.
And just to follow up, so if you're a transmission pipeline of 36 inches, you're saying that distribution has to be done with Liberty Utilities, or then much more infrastructure has to be set up in order to distribute to us locally?
That's correct. The distribution companies, Berkshire Gas, National Grid, Columbia Gas, Unitil, they're in the business of distributing gas to residents, industrial customers, businesses. We serve those customers. We serve power companies, the distribution companies that give it to you. And then you also asked about LNG. Before I forget, I apologize. I didn't mean to ignore that question. LNG export, there's currently, there used to be 5, and now there's 4 proposed projects along this system, Spectra system. There's one up in just north of Maine. It's called Down East LNG. There's 3 others. One's in St. John, New Brunswick. That's Repsol Canaport. They recently, about 6 years ago, went into service, and they're importing LNG from Trinidad and Tobago. Well, now they can't compete, because what's happening is they're losing their market because they cannot compete with the low-cost Marcellus. So they filed to turn it around. They hope to turn it around and export it. 2 other projects are way up in Nova Scotia. They also are looking to export. One of them was an import facility. Where I'm going with this is, these are potential proposed projects, basically. If they go, and they want to contract on our pipeline to get to Drake-It, and they want to contract on Maritimes to get all the way up to them, both of our companies are obligated, we're open access transporters, we are obligated to sell them capacity. If they're willing to enter into a long-term, 20-year binding agreement with the credit requirements, we can't deny them. That would be undue discrimination. So that's the practice. Now, there's 22 proposed projects in Western Canada. None of them have gone forward. There's, like I said, 4 now in Eastern Canada, Atlantic Canada. None of them have gone forward. They may, but none of them have. Right now, we have 0 LNG customers that are contracting with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Since we have so many questions, let's try and confine it to 1 question per person. Thank you.
My name is Victor Carlson. I live in Peacock Brook Lane. And as the map shows, my home, at least, is probably about 2,500 feet from the pipeline. And when you think of this 36-inch diameter pipeline, that's scary. And I hope the Board of Selectmen have gotten the mood of the majority of the people here. I believe they're not too happy about this. But anyway, that's what I want to say.
My name is Rick Buersdorf. I live on Patricia Lane, and I did have several questions, but I just will bring it down to 1 comment and a question. My home is less than 500 feet from where you're putting the pipeline. My neighbors' homes are a lot less than that. In actuality, if you put the pipeline where you say you're going to put it, it is going to be right on their back doorsteps, literally. The trees will all be taken down. There'll be no buffer for the homes. We have had a home already sold on our street. They were advised to sell it for a lot less than they paid for it in order to be able to sell the house by the real estate agent. It was sold. It was sold for considerably less than what they paid for it. I don't have the exact numbers, but I know that to be the case. I have 3 granddaughters that I'm raising. This home is my retirement home. This is where I want to end up living. I can't afford to lose value in my home, and I can't afford to put my granddaughters' lives at stake. I would ask any of you guys if you'd be willing to take your home, stick it right on the gas pipeline 500 feet from it, and raise your family there. I'm not willing to do that, and I will do whatever it takes to stop you. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is J.M. Vore. I live on Simeon Wilson Road, and the pipeline is slated to be put down probably about 20 feet away from my bedroom window. It's slated to go over my well and down my driveway and through my neighbor's yard. So obviously I'm not overly excited about this. We've already had numerous families that we've talked to who are planning on moving to Amherst who have already asked us where the pipeline is so they can move as far away from it as possible. So I think it's a little bit ludicrous to think that this won't affect property values if the pipeline is directly on your property. With that said, I'd like a little bit more of a clarification. When you talk about co-location, I have a very different understanding of co-location than what I think you guys have as your definition, so I'd just like to make sure we're talking the same terms here. When I was looking through your documents, in one of the documents specifically about Amherst, I can't speak about the rest of the pipeline, but at least in Amherst, in one of the documents it says 0 feet will be used in the final right-of-way for the pipeline. It does say that you will use 15 feet of right-of-way from the existing right-of-way during your temporary construction. So my understanding of reading this is not that this is going to be within the right-of-way of the high-tension power line or even right next to it. That's going to be a certain distance lateral to it. So instead of having one space with both these things co-located, we're actually going to have two parallel lines, which really sort of, to me, defeats the whole purpose of co-location because you're still going to have to destroy essentially the same amount of land that you would if you were putting it anywhere else through any of the other towns. So if you could correct me if I'm misunderstanding or if you've changed your current plans.
The plan of co-location is to share some of the easement, okay? It could be right next to it, like you said, or shared. Our plans are to work with the power company and use as much of that easement as possible, realizing our new line would be 5 feet outside the corridor, and the new permanent right-of-way would be another 25 feet. So we'd have 30 feet outside the corridor of new easement. And then we'd have 20 feet inside as shared. That would be permanent easement. There may be other areas where we have to reduce that down because there isn't the 30 feet. Then we'd like to work with the power company. In addition to that 50 feet permanent, we need temporary workspace. We'd like that temporary workspace for as much as possible to be within the power line easement so we don't have to clear trees and buffer areas. And in neighborhoods and areas where there's residentials, we're going to have to narrow down some of these right-of-ways. That's one of the things we want to do through our survey process. So the co-location, there's a wide range, but our premise of co-location is 5 feet outside because we don't know if the power companies will allow us to share within their easement. There are areas we have to cross the power line. There are some areas that are very tight that we don't want to disturb the residences. We want to work and may locate that within the power line. So it'll vary, but we want to use as much of the power line corridor for both shared easement and especially during construction.
Have we had a chance to visit with you and talk about the project, one of the agents?
No, you haven't. We've actually deferred having you guys do a survey on our yard.
So one of the things in the tools in your particular case is to learn about your well, to learn about how close your house is, to learn, okay, maybe in this particular case we have to go to Eversource and say, because of the impacts to your property, we have to be more inside the power line. And we don't know that unless we have that dialogue with you. And you can continue to do what you want to do. That's absolutely your right. At the same time, if we can help to minimize that, it would be helpful to get on your property.
Well, I guess the question is, why do I want to help you minimize the destruction of my property? I don't want you in my town. You all seem like very nice gentlemen. I know you're doing a job, and this is what you're here to do. But I don't want you coming through my neighborhood. I don't want you coming through my yard. There's not much, or there's really probably nothing you can offer me that's going to make me say, this is a good thing for me and my family and my 4 children. No matter how safe you can make this, to what Dr. Rowe said when he was up here, there's still a part of me that is extremely worried about some sort of catastrophic failure, no matter how rare it is. I don't want to put my children in that situation. I didn't ask for you guys to come here and put this in my yard. You guys chose to do that, okay? So I'm sorry, I don't really want to work with you to minimize how much damage you're going to do to my yard. Any damage you do to my yard, you might as well do it to the entire yard, because there's no good place you're going to be able to put a natural gas pipeline through my yard. And as far as your response for the egress from Simeon Wilson Road, the fact that you guys are going to make the pipe a little bit bigger, and there's a good chance it probably won't happen, really doesn't make me feel that much more secure if something does happen and I can't get out of my neighborhood. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm Rick Elverson. I live at 42 Severns Bridge Road. It's in Amherst. The street in front of me is in Merrimack. And I just want to make a follow-up comment to what the gentleman said just before me. When the street was having blasting done approximately 10, 12 years ago to put in storm sewers, I lost my well. And I can tell you the company that was doing that, I think it was a Maine mining company, was no help to me at all. Okay. Now, question for you. You guys really haven't talked safety to me tonight. You talked about some little statistical kinds of things. I would like you to talk specifically about pipelines that are 36 inches in diameter or larger, running at 2.4 billion cubic feet per day or greater. And I'd like you to talk about specific safety incidents that have been experienced over the past 20 years.
Yeah, well, we'd have to go back to the PHMSA website and look at that. I don't have that specific data here.
In my mind, that's the most important question tonight. You know, the construction is a short-term process. All of us are going to be living around this pipeline, hopefully for many years. And unless you can provide some information to us about safety living around this pipeline, I got to tell you, it scares the hell out of me. You know, when you talk about the distance between these shutoff valves being anywhere between 8 miles and 20 miles, that is a huge volume of gas. These neighborhoods are heavily wooded. What happens when you burn off gas for a day? It's going to light this whole community up. Have you guys thought about that?
Okay, let's keep it civil. Thank you.
One thing I did want to follow up on, the gentleman gave an example earlier, propane. Propane is a completely different commodity than natural gas. We will follow up and give you blowdown times between valves. We don't have that number right off the top of our head. It's like 2 hours or 3 hours, and it vents straight up in the air because it's lighter than air. Excuse me. But it's a different product, what you're dealing with propane. I don't know the gentleman's example. I'm sure he's right. 2 completely different products.
Understood. Fahrenheit 451. When you're blowing up a big fire stream, these trees that are 100 feet away, they're going to catch up. You guys got to really think about that and provide us some information.
We will do that. We will follow up with you.
My name is Don Foley, and I live on Patricia Lane, which is very heavily impacted by this plan. And one thing that concerns me is something that I've not read in any of your material or heard discussed here tonight or at any of the meetings I've attended, is that New Hampshire is the granite state. And if you walk that power line adjacent to our properties, there is a huge outcropping of granite. My concern is, and my question is, what impact is it going to have on our neighborhood homes that are sitting on that same rock that you're going to have to blast to get your pipe the level you want it?
And Don, I'm on the land side, not on the engineering side, but I have been in the industry for many years. And part of the acquisition process when we work with landowners is to ensure that we test the properties, the foundations. We do a structural analysis before any blasting occurs. And after the blasting occurs, we would reinspect, and we would share those reports with you as well, so you have a documented case. We don't anticipate the blasting, and I'll go a little into the blasting, not on the engineering side, but from a layman's side. The blasting charges and the shape of the blasting, because all that we're interested in is getting a ditch for the pipe. Not like building a highway where you're removing whole ledges. So it's a little different, and that's as deep as I'll go in that regard. Also, with the well that the gentleman had talked about, where he lost his well, we would do the same type of well inspection for a well within 200 feet, and we would work out with the landowner as well. We put it in writing, where we would test the well before construction and make sure that the quality and quantity was noted, and we would test it afterwards. And again, we would put it in writing that if it was damaged as a result of our activities, that we'd be liable for that.
Well, what does that mean to me as a homeowner if my property is damaged? And
Well, then we would repair it, whatever that damage
but
was.
what does that do to the value of the property?
Well, I guess I'm missing you a little, because we'd still be making you whole if the damage was repaired, and knowledge that it would be our responsibility if it was from construction.
Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Stephanie Grund, and I live on Colonel Wilkins Road. I'm not directly impacted, but I have concerns. My kids do attend the school system, so I do have that concern. But my main question is, you've talked a little bit about the compressor station that's going to be in New Ipswich, but you haven't discussed where the meter stations and the valve stations are going to be located. Are they going to be near residential properties? What do they sound like? Are people going to see them from their homes? You said you didn't know where you're going to place them yet, but if you're going to impact people and where they are next to homes, when do they get told?
The valve stations, when we site them, the people, the owners will know. We try to site those away from residential areas. We have some flexibility in some of the spacing to make sure we have ingress and egress to those valve sites. So that's part of the process that's coming up. We're hopeful to have that in the next couple months, that we know where those valve stations are. There is one meter station proposed. There's an interconnect with Liberty. I think in our FERC file, and we show it in Amherst, there's discussions that may move over to Merrimack. They haven't decided on their take station yet, and that will be outside of residential. So that's part of the process, but we didn't really talk about meter stations. The compressor station that I showed, that was like a 22-acre fenced-in area. The meter stations, like maybe an acre or less fenced-in area along the pipeline, preferably along roads, and we'd like to put it in a commercial, more of a commercial location than a residential location.
Yeah, because that could significantly impact someone's property value if they have to look at that outside their home.
My name is Pat Roderazzo from Patricia Lane. Twofold. One, I am the president of the association, and your proposed plan is to go right through our entire neighborhood, right down the middle of our road, which is a private road, which we own, which we paid for, and which we maintain. It also is going through a secondary road, which is off the side of us, which is Sunridge Way, which is also a private road that we maintain. What guarantees do I have from you and your company that any work that's being done will be taken care of and it will be put back in its initial conditions? That's question number one. Question number two, as a personal homeowner, you're going right through my property, so I'm double pissed, okay? Got a double whammy here. You talk about compensation for what's going on, and the gentleman that's standing to my extreme right said that compensation would be taken care of and would be done, and you could still live on the property. Could you explain that to me? I don't understand that. If you're going to come right down through the middle of my property, take my house away from me, how can I still live in it and be compensated for it?
Pat, good questions. We're not going to take your house. So I can guarantee that we're not going to take your
You
house.
can guarantee that?
Yeah, we're not going to take your house. We won't be taking any houses.
You won't be taking any houses?
No, no.
Well, how do
So-
you explain that the pipeline and in your drawings that you've put up on the town's website, okay, and these websites that you keep referring us to, shows the pipeline going right down through our neighborhood, right through our area, and the buffer zone that you've got worked out around it is actually going right through the middle of our houses. How do you figure that? And how do you explain that, please?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Pat. And what those plans represent is a 400-foot survey corridor based on a survey line. So I can't say...
Excuse me, that's one plan that I saw tonight.
Okay.
But the previous one that's on our website at the town shows an actual pipeline. It shows some blue lines, which are 25 feet from the pipeline, and then it shows a 50-foot red or purple lines, and then it shows some other areas where it shows an area. I've got copies of it if you'd like to look at them.
No, I've seen them.
I hope you have, because apparently you don't understand it. As an engineer, retired engineer, I should say, I understand blueprints, and I can read. And
I'm not questioning your ability on
What
that.
you've passed out so far is garbage.
Well, and those plans are being refined. Right now, they're not based, hold on just a sec. Right now, they're not based on field survey.
Okay.
Right now, we haven't been on the ground. So we're using the best available aerial imagery to be able to site the pipeline.
Yeah, as a homeowner association, I have refused your permission to come onto my property for any surveying.
And that's your
And I
problem.
intend, that's from the association and from as a homeowner. Okay?
Yep.
Until you decide what you're gonna do. If you look at your plan that you showed, you arbitrarily jumped across the power lines from one side to the other, about 300 yards in front of us, because you wanted to avoid a church. But you wanted to impact 8 homes, but you avoid one church. If you had kept the line, you went down, you went across the pipeline to the other side, down the other side, and then back across the pipeline again, just to avoid the church property. And it happens to be church parking lot, which is not even a building. It's just parking lot. Your plans are the most ridiculous thing I've seen as an engineer in my lifetime. Okay? I don't know how much engineering you've done, personally.
Me, I'm attesting all night.
I
I'm
guess
not
so.
the engineer.
Is there an engineer here tonight?
Yes, there is.
Okay, can you address my issues, please?
I can't right now, but I will look into it very seriously.
And remember, well, Pat, just a minute.
You're just bringing up the point.
Time out.
You're bringing up
You gentlemen came to this meeting to address us. You were at Litchfield tonight earlier. You've been all around this area with your dog and pony show. You think you'd be organized and ready with some hard facts that you could answer our questions.
And Pat.
And you have not. You
and-
passed out a bunch of garbage literature at the front door. The selectmen up there, I hope, are listening. Okay?
Pat.
Because the townspeople will remember how you guys acted and how you voted.
Pat, one of the things that we've talked about tonight, one of the things we talked about tonight is routing. And we talked about it being in the pre-filing phase, and the town's very familiar with that too. And at the very beginning of our presentation, we talked about route deviations and modifications. And one of the questions that the town had was, how do you engage the pipeline company with alternate routing? And this is part of the process, Pat. This is part of the process. So what Mark just talked about was, yes, we're going to look into it. We didn't have the opportunity to visit in person to learn about your impacts. We will. We're listening to you tonight.
Look at the drawings. It's your drawings. I didn't produce the drawings. you guys produce the drawings, and if you can't read your own drawings and explain them to me, why you've done certain things, how is anybody going to approve this thing or be with you?
And Pat, as Mark and I both said, we'll certainly follow up, and we'll certainly look
I
at
tell you,
it.
when I was in engineering, if I acted the way you guys did on a proposal, I would have been fired.
All right, should we have one more person at the microphone? Does anyone else want to speak after this person? Okay, please.
Yeah, this is Tim Shea, 7
Please-
Hickory.
Please get in line now, and then we'll take the folks that are in line, and we'll conclude the evening at that point.
So, yeah, Tim Shea, 7 Hickory Drive, Amherst, New Hampshire. You guys have been building pipelines for a long time. I'm curious to know, once you get to this point in the development stage of putting a pipeline in, what is the probability that it actually gets completed either in its current routing or in a preferably more southerly routing?
That would be Massachusetts.
Well, we're still in the review process, so it is possible that there will be adjustments. How significant those will be, that's up to the regulators, but there still could be adjustments.
I guess my point is, when you get to this point in the stage, are pipelines, I mean, is the NERC going to support this and it'll happen? And if we don't want it in Amherst, then we need to figure out how to get it moved? Or is there an opportunity to stop the pipeline altogether, is really the gist of my question.
Well, the decision at the end of the day isn't up to us.
Right.
We're proposing, the state and federal regulators. The Board of Selectmen will have some input, but they're not a regulatory authority over the pipeline. Let's make that clear. The state does have a regulatory role, and the federal government has a regulatory role. They'll make the ultimate decision. Our history as a company here in New England and throughout the United States is we don't pursue projects, and we're still in the exploratory phase of this project. When we file for our permits at the fall, we're fully committed to moving forward on this project. Still, we're trying to finalize our commercial arrangements, continue to adjust and modify the routing process to get to a place where we believe this is something that can be permitted. If we file for our application this fall, we'll have internally a comfort level that we can get this project permitted based upon what we are doing to make this project more permittable through the process. So in long answer to your question, everybody is welcome to and encouraged to participate in this process. And individuals can have a difference. I can tell you from experience, everybody can that's been in this business for a long time. The FERC will require us to respond to inquiries from the public and from the Board of Selectmen and others. If you make a public comment or send a letter or come to a scoping meeting, those are going to be comments that we're going to need to respond to. So we've made a proposal. It's up for public discussion, and we're trying to be responsive, and we continue to make that effort, and we commit to doing that to the board tonight and to all of you. I'm not going to say at the end of the day everyone's going to be thrilled with this. That's obviously not going to be the case. But what we're trying to do is what we believe is in the interest of the customers, the Liberty Utilities and the others, that's in the broader public interest while addressing what we know are the most important issues to you, which are the individual local impacts.
Thank you.
My name is David Beach, 25 Simeon Wilson Road. I want to bring up a point about something that hasn't been discussed tonight, which is conservation lands. Part of the reason that I understand the route was moved from Massachusetts was because of the impact to Article 97 conservation properties in Massachusetts. The route through Amherst currently targets state-protected conservation lands. To my knowledge, the state of New Hampshire has never had eminent domain proceedings brought against conservation lands. And my question is, are you prepared to do that, assuming that the town, which owns the land, refuses your easement request?
The Article 97 process in Massachusetts is unique to Massachusetts. That is correct. It's a process that requires approval of the state legislature and the governor for basically accessing any lands controlled by the state.
And my point is that same protection exists for parcels you
So-
targeted in Amherst.
For whatever protections, and I know we're looking into now the specific properties that fall under different requirements with the state, that'll all be taken into account into the final routing process. Areas where we can't make modifications, we'll be talking about mitigation, but again, at the end of the day, it's going to be the state and federal processes that we ultimately have to follow.
So you are prepared to use eminent domain to take our conservation?
Remember, we're a private company. We do not have eminent domain authority. The federal government has eminent domain authority. So if the federal
The route
government...
you're currently using targets state-protected conservation land.
Correct. So we're going to need to secure the appropriate state approvals as part of the regulatory process.
And the
So it's an
property is owned
interactive...
by the town of Amherst.
It's an interactive process between the state and the federal government, the approval of these projects. The FERC issues the certificate with the guidance and consultation of the state. So we're going to need to run a parallel path here with state approvals and federal approvals, and that'll all be part of the discussion. We can't say exactly tonight what parcels there may be adjustments on based upon state requirements, but we're going to have to go through that process.
This will be the last question.
Again, my name is Rick Buersdorf on Patricia Lane, and as a footnote to this gentleman, where you're putting your pipeline is through the aquifer. It's called Bond Terrain Aquifer. It is the water supply for Hollis, Amherst, Milford. A lot of wells depend on that aquifer. I'm not sure of the exact depths and everything, but it was my understanding that there's about a 15-foot depth to the ledge there. So there could be some severe impact on the aquifer, which supplies the water for our area. A question. Have you gentlemen ever looked into the infrastructure in the towns? For example, Amherst, we're an all-volunteer fire department. I believe, and I could stand corrected, there are 2 full-time employees for the fire department.
That's right.
If there were to be an incident, and I've worked with gas for 45 years, it doesn't just blow up and burn. It sucks the oxygen out of the air, it expands, it goes out, it creates a lot of problems. This town does not have any way to be able to combat something like that was to happen. Now, you were asked earlier a question about what you would do to help supply the town and supply equipment. I didn't hear an answer to that question. I heard a lot of stuff around it, but I didn't hear anything about that. What do we have, 6 engines in town? I don't know. Sure, not more than 7 or 8 at the max. But what do? We just sit back and watch everything burn. We have no way to be able to take care of anything around here. So, you know, it's more than just a pipeline going through. You can say it's probably never going to happen, but I'm not willing to bet on probably never, because having been in this business for 45 years, I've seen probably never happen quite a few times. And as I said, I'm not willing to risk my family for it.
Mark mentioned before about our working with emergency responders on the training aspect. What I mentioned, and you can see a copy of the presentation, are specific examples, and I like to show specific examples of when I personally, as head of public affairs for this company, have gone around the country and on projects and work with emergency responders and others for providing equipment, and that has come in all shapes and sizes. So what I'm telling you is that we're going to do the same thing here in Amherst, and I haven't had a discussion about this with the Board of Selectmen yet. There are a lot of other issues that I think we need to work on right now, but that'll be part of the discussions that we'll have, specifically what the requests of the town are.
So I was going to thank both Senator Daniels and our Representative Hansen for attending this night, but Pete, you've stepped to the microphone, so why don't you take one last comment?
This is just a quick question. Peter Hansen, 82 Amherst Street in Amherst, and I don't think I'll be impacted by the pipeline, but I do have a question about the role that the New Hampshire SEC plays in this whole permitting structure. If you could just give us a brief description of how you see the SAC in New Hampshire, what the task will be with you, it would be appreciated, I think, by everybody.
So the FERC has primary oversight over interstate natural gas pipelines. They'll issue the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, and they'll determine whether the project is in the public interest because they regulate interstate natural gas systems. Each state has its own system of regulation as well, environmental permits, road permits, and in New Hampshire's case, the siting process. So we're going to have to go through an application process. It's not dissimilar to the FERC process. It's unique in its own capacity, and there may be some sharing of information between the two processes. And frankly, we're just beginning the dialogue with the agencies and understanding the complete process itself. And in fact, there are modifications going on to the process right now, some regulatory changes and that the state is making, so it's an evolving process. But at the end of the day, we're going to need to follow that process. That process will consist of public hearings that the state will have. I think that there's a minimum of one in each county, I think is what the siting process requires. And that's separate from all the meetings that have been held before, and that'll be more of a formal public testimony comment, and they'll have a full-scale review of the impacts of this project. And and we're trying to have people as part of our team that have been part of that siting process in other parts of the state so we understand what that means. But I do know that in some cases there have been adjustments that are part of that process, routing adjustments, or modifications to other applications based upon public input. So it's a very interactive process, a public process, and it will run in parallel from a timeline perspective with the FERC process.
All right, John, would you
Okay,
take
I have
the
a
last one, please?
couple more points on that. As the Kinder Morgan folks have said, we are in the pre-filing period. What that means is they have not yet submitted formal documents to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission saying we want to build this pipeline in these locations and we want to get it done by this amount of time. So for the next 6 months or so, we're going to be in the pre-filing phase. And that's where we're having these conversations about where should the thing go, where should it avoid, and so on. When they file in the fourth quarter of this year, that will start, the filing at the FERC level will start the New Hampshire Site Evaluation Committee process, the NHSEC. That's the state process that parallels the federal process. It is supposed to produce a yes or no answer within a year. So they usually don't start it until the actual filing takes place. So that's how those two go together. We had a warrant article on the last ballot authorizing the selectmen to file for intervenor status on this pipeline matter. What that means is after it is filed in the fourth quarter, we have the town's blessing, in fact, the town's direction, to file and intervene and try to steer this thing to where it will either do the least amount of harm or potentially go away. But we don't have the authority to file until after the application's been filed in the fourth quarter. The New Hampshire Site Evaluation Committee process will be kicking off around that time too, and we intend to intervene in that process as well. So that's the timeline for the two different regulatory processes.
And you want to talk about our letter to the FERC?
If you had attended our start of our session earlier this evening at 6 o'clock, you might have seen us signing a document, which is the town's comments to the FERC and Kinder Morgan concerning the currently proposed pipeline. Spoiler alert, you'll get it tomorrow, but we don't like the current proposed route.
Okay.
We list, in the letter, we take the focus of, how this would impact the town's rural character, the quality of life of the residents, and the environmental impact on several sensitive properties. We don't address issues like safety and all the rest, but we reserve the right to send a subsequent letter addressing all of those concerns later. Bottom line is we would like you to come and talk to us before you start throwing darts at a map in a map room in Houston. Anything else?
So I think that concludes our open session. Mr. Chairman, would you like to?
No, I'd like to thank all of you for coming this evening. I'd like to thank Kinder Morgan for attending and hopefully answering some of your questions. And like a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all for coming.